different recordings. One will be on study unit 1 and the second one will be on study unit 2. Kefilwe, I see that you are typing. Let me just wait a moment to see what Kefilwe is asking. Okay, I cannot see what Kefilwe is asking, so I'm going to get the next slide ready. Just close that one. Beatrice, is the slide of study unit 2 visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes. Oh, okay, thank you. Then I'm going to start the session. Let me just double check that we are recording. Yes, we are recording. Okay, so study unit 2 is obviously following on study unit 1. In study unit 1, we looked at what is intelligence as an entity. We looked at what are the 3 different types of intelligence: strategic intelligence, tactical crime intelligence, and operational crime intelligence. We considered that tactical crime intelligence comes in 2 parts: proactive tactical crime intelligence and reactive tactical crime intelligence. We differentiated between these 3 types of crime intelligence, but we also acknowledged that you cannot compartmentalize them. So they're not as clear-cut as blue and yellow. Sometimes they mix and sometimes it's impossible to separate them. Sometimes they overlap and that is also okay. Sometimes in crime investigation, things get messy, and then one must be okay with messy until it's time to analyze and to clean up the messy. So in study unit 2, we are going to consider and unpack the crime intelligence process. Let's take a moment to think about the term process. What does it mean? What does it imply? In the most basic terms, a process is a step-by-step, often predetermined path that must be followed to produce a specific outcome. Much like following a recipe or instructions how to assemble something you bought at a store, sometimes in this process, you cannot skip step 1 and 2 and jump to step 3. In other instances, you can actually combine steps 4 and 6 while doing step 1. It all depends on the recipe you follow or the process that you are following. Now ask yourself, does the quality of the ingredients matter? Much like a good recipe, the end product is influenced to a very large extent by the quality of the ingredient you put into that product. Would you use an old, rotten, stale bread or lemon to make cheesecake or scones? I honestly hope you wouldn't, but unless the recipe calls for stale, rotten bread, you will not put stale, rotten bread into a recipe. And this is an important thing that we must never lose sight of. When we are gathering, or when we are producing intelligence, what goes in? We must put something into the process, and that something is information. Now, where are we going to get this information? There are two broad categories of information, where information comes from. The one is an open source and the one is a closed source. What is an open source? An open source is exactly that, a source that is open and available to anyone who is willing to go and look for it. These are the sources that's available to the general public. You must just know what you are looking for. Remember that many of your online searches, when you are online, there are search engines that track your search patterns and the history. If you want to know what I'm interested in, you can quickly determine that by looking at either my browser history, my favorite pages, or even the type of Google adverts I get when I am online, because there's an algorithm that has been tracking my clicks and my interests. So the moment I open up my phone on let's say Twitter, because I'm basically active on Twitter. Twitter is the social media site where I get a lot of my information. Information, not intelligence, information. Then I will get adverts and things unless I've set my privacy settings. In terms of running shoes, I will get the latest articles on crime intelligence, on crime investigation, on art crime, because the artificial intelligence has tracked my search history, and it is looking back to look forward. Does that sound like something we discussed? It's very strategic in terms of what they do. You must never forget, social media has made it virtually impossible for people to not have a digital footprint. The only way to really be invisible is to be a digital abstainer, to have never, ever gone online. This is when you do nothing online. All your actions, all your meetings, all your socializing happens in real life. You do not even use a cell phone. You use a normal old technology landline that's not working on LAN, it's not working on a Wi-Fi, because otherwise you're online. But even if you did that, if you have a bank account, your information is out there. If you draw money at an ATM, your card might be scammed or cloned. To how many of you has this not happened before? I've been a victim twice of cloned cards. Can one really be offline and therefore invisible? Once I send a post out into cyberspace, it's there for everybody. I can feel bad afterwards and go back and say, oh, I shouldn't have said that, and delete the tweet. But it's out there. It's on all the people who I have connections with, who have access to my information. Anybody could have taken a screenshot and saved it in a directory or in a folder to use it one day when they want to pinch me for something. It's virtually impossible to retract what you send out. Now, there are algorithms that trace and delete things that are online, but this is never, ever 100% accurate. So that is basically open sources. Closed sources. These are sources that an ordinary person like you and I have no access to unless we meet certain requirements. What may this be? Police officials can draw information on an individual with just the date of birth or an ID number or a registration number. They have access to the crime administration system on which all crimes are reported. They have access to information about your motor vehicle, firearm licenses, criminal history, but to name a few. So let's consider two important pieces of legislation that impact on our searches for information. The Promotion of Access to Information Act, the link is there in the slide, so you can go and visit that site. And then the POPIA Act. The POPIA Act is the Protection of Personal Information Act. Now, at UNISA, you would have seen yesterday I sent on Telegram asking for students to volunteer to take part in an interview. I do not want to breach the POPIA Act and tell my line manager, okay, you can have these 3 students, because I mean, I have all your student numbers. I can get it on the module site. But I do not want to share that type of information with my line manager without your permission. Hence, I asked. But not everybody's going to do that. But the university have processes in place to make sure that we do not transgress the POPIA Act. So there are certain steps we take before we undertake this type of communication with students. Then I also want to make sure that you understand that there are certain types of information that are closed sources. For example, if you want banking information, you will have to subpoena the bank records through the court. You will have to be a police official to subpoena bank records. I did a search very recently on doctor-patient privilege, because as far as I can remember, this is sacrosanct. You do not access doctor-patient information. But what I did find is that the police have no more right to access this confidential information than you or I, except if the patient gives consent for the release of the information. So if I'm alive and I can tell the police, yes, you can access that information, or the information is needed in compliance with a court order, and the court has to issue on the foundation of a statement which make certain claims. They will then issue a court order, or a written directive has been issued by a judge or a magistrate in terms of section 2051 of the Criminal Procedure Act to disclose the information. What they will look at is the public interest in disclosing the information has to outweigh the public interest to keep that information confidential. It's not a decision they take lightly. So they really look at all the pros and cons before they release such information. Other avenues to obtain access to closed sources of information. In law enforcement, what some of the companies out there do, like your insurance companies, your banking companies, not like your banking sector, but your SABRIC, is they establish partnerships with the South African Police Service. We have SABRIC, we have Business Against Crime, Business Leadership, which is Business Leadership of South Africa. We have SAICB and SAIA. Here are some of the links. You can go and look at what these institutions do. You can look at what type of services they offer. Now, these agreements must be legitimate and they must meet legal requirements. They also have to be approved at the highest level in those organizations. This sounds like something we've talked about. Yes, this speaks about strategic intelligence, as this type of partnerships require a backward-looking, a forward perspective. We change policy. We're going to have partnerships with A, B, and C so that we can do X, Y, and Z in the company in terms of the strategy. So that is how, in terms of partnerships, strategic intelligence can inform business ventures going forward. We must also realize that these companies produce they give a service, and you will pay an annual fee for these services. And in some instances, every time you access one of these databases, you will actually pay a fee for every document you download, but it will also leave an electronic trail. So if you are busy with something which is not totally legal, remember that wherever you click leaves an electronic trail. We will talk about that later when we get to the intelligence cycle. Let's pause for a moment before we go on to the actual cycle and consider the importance of knowing what is it that we are looking for, or where are we headed? There's an African proverb I found online that says, "He who never knows where he is going will never know whether he has arrived." Now, I really want to try and play you this video clip I'm hoping it's going to open up and not freeze the entire computer again. Okay, I'm going to have to reshare my screen. I'm going to have to reshare my screen so that you can see what I'm seeing. Okay, you should be seeing Alice in Wonderland. Is that correct? Okay, listen to this interaction.
Prof, is there sound on this?
Yes, there is. Can you not hear?
I cannot hear. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who doesn't hear.
Okay, can the students, were the students able to hear the sound?
No, Prof, there's no sound.
Able. Okay, I will have to check what's going on there. I'm sorry that didn't work. Well, basically what happened in that little video clip is that Alice asked the cat, she was at an intersection, and she said to the cat was up in the tree, and she said to the cat, which way must I go? Must I go left or must I go right? And the cat said to her, but where do you want to go to? And she says, no, it doesn't matter. And he said, well, then it doesn't matter which way you go. And this reinforces the importance of knowing what is it that we are looking for when we want to gather intelligence, when we want to produce intelligence. And this takes us to the first step of the intelligence gathering cycle. Is the audio clear now from my side? Can you all hear me?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, sure. Okay, so the first step is that of collection. But I want to remind us all of the phrase GIGO. GIGO stands for garbage in, garbage out. You will remember I talked about the stale bread previously, and this is what's important in this area, is that whatever we do, the quality of the end product we get is influenced by what we put in. And we must also remember that during each of these steps, collection, collation, analysis, dissemination, and feedback, we must stop before we go to the next step. We must stop and we must evaluate. Is what we are doing valid? Is what we are doing accurate? And is what we are doing reliable? Now, how on earth do we do that? It's important that when this first step starts, that it's based on something. We must have a plan. This plan is called the collection plan. While it's safe to say that we're not going to have an exact idea of what we are looking for in the minutest details, we're going to have an overall idea. Looking for the characteristics of the group or the groups. We're looking for what geographic areas do they operate in, criminal history associated with a group, their financial status, who do they associate with, what other criminal groups do they affiliate with, do they have any links with corrupt government officials, what is their modus operandi, and what are their trends in criminal activity. So this will give you almost like a framework that frames your collection process. Whatever we do has to be relevant, valid, and accurate. Okay, so where do we get information from if it's not open and if it's not closed? What if we need information that comes out of a criminal syndicate, directly inside a criminal syndicate. I have put a video clip in here of the movie Donnie Brasco. Now, Donnie Brasco was an FBI agent who infiltrated the mafia as a deep cover agent. I'm going to chat a little bit about deep cover agents. And he infiltrated the mafia, and he was able to get a lot of inside information that they couldn't get through wiretaps, surveillance operations, informers. He was given authority to take part in what they were doing, but at the end of the day, he was able to testify against them. So take some time and go and look at this video clip. It's where something happens in the operation that causes his how can I say, his handler or his manager to doubt who he is, and he gets called a rat. When I was in the police, I had the opportunity to be a shallow cover agent. Now you get deep cover agents and you get shallow cover agents. Deep cover agents, if they are police officials, what usually happens is they get caught, in inverted commas, on the job doing something. They get fired. So they are basically declared criminals. And then they join the criminal syndicate and they infiltrate that syndicate. But this can be anything 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, when you're a deep cover agent. I was a shallow cover agent. This means that I infiltrated a syndicate for a very short period of time. I think it was about a month. I stayed at my normal house. I went about my normal duties. I was still a police official. But it was only during certain times of the day and activities where I became this person. My cover story was that I came from an Italian background. I was busy building my own business away from my overbearing Italian father, and I infiltrated a criminal group who had stolen a diamond ring out of Parliament. We had various meetings where we would fly from the one airport to another airport. We would arrive in an aeroplane. We would be taken up to a private suite, which was arranged with the airport's company for a let's say a VIP. The person handing out the drinks at the bar was also a police official as my backup, and that is how we held our meetings. Once I had, I met with a couple of people before I eventually got introduced to the person who had the diamond in her possession. Once I physically saw the diamond, we were able to arrest her, and we traced the entire group. It wasn't a syndicate, it was a group, and we eventually got back to the cleaner who stole the diamond ring out of Parliament. As an undercover agent for this, I needed Section 252A approval, and this was granted by the then Directorate of Public Prosecutions. So Section 252A of the Criminal Procedure Act just allows a law enforcement officer or an agent to use a trap or to engage in an undercover operation in order to prevent, detect, or investigate. In this instance, we were investigating the commission of offence, and evidence obtained through this way is admissible in court. But usually what happens in the court is the first thing they attack is they say entrapment. You trapped me. And then we go through all the trial within the trial. Okay, surveillance operations are also very, very important. Now, when we are done and we have time to go through these, this is one of the videos I really want you to watch. It explains to you how a surveillance operation works. How do you follow a person? Mobile surveillance, static surveillance. In FOR2607, we will deal with those two basic types of surveillances. And it's important that whatever you do is done correctly and legally. The same with the interception of communications. When you're tapping a person's phone or recording conversations, it has to be done legally. You will see at the end of each step, I have this little post-it note. This is to remind us before we go to the next step, we have to evaluate whether the collected information in this step is valid, accurate and reliable. If for any reason there's a shortcoming in terms of the information we've collected, we have to stop. We must address this. We must rectify it. We must fill that gap before we carry on with the next process. Remember, garbage in, garbage out, and we don't skip steps. Okay, our next step is that of collation. During the second step, you're going to bring together all the information that has been gathered, and it gets reviewed. We look at it, it gets sorted, it gets indexed, and it gets stored. So there you can see there's different colors, it's very demarcar. So now we sort and we pull it apart and we look at it. Similar information is then brought together so that we can form a picture of what this information means. The format being used is of vital importance because the wrong format will result in us not seeing the links that we need to see. Oftentimes, different formats will be used on the same set of data, which will show us the data from different perspectives. Now, during this step of data, the data are managed in an orderly manner. So in other words, it's a step-by-step process so that we can see what is going on and what links are we seeing? What relationships are we seeing? Are we seeing any patterns form? So already by the collation, when it starts, can I almost say now we start bringing in the computer programs and the systems to help us once we've sorted the data into databases or spreadsheets. Now we run the algorithm or whatever we use. And one of these is cell phone linkage analysis. There is an image there of how cell phones can link people in terms of networks. Now, there is a tool we used in the South African Police Force. It was called the Analyst Notebook. We would import a suspect's cell phone data, the towers, the numbers. And if we have one or two of the other phones, we would import that data as well, obviously with the necessary authorization from the service providers, because they have to provide you with the data. And then we start not playing with the data, we start looking at the data from different perspectives. Person A contacting person B, is there a pattern during which time they contact each other? So there's a link there. And you will all recall the murder of Talib Peterson. During the investigation, the investigators were able to prove in court that the widow, Miss Najwa Peterson, had lied under oath when she gave her version of the events. She alleged that Talib was shot during a robbery at the house, yet when the detective got there, she was in possession of both of her phones. Now, if there's a robbery at your house, the robbers take everything. They don't leave the wife and the family with two phones. And she was at home at the time of the incident. She alleges she was upstairs in her bedroom asleep. She and Talit were separated in terms of bedrooms at that stage. But the actual towers that her phones pinged on placed her in very close proximity, not asleep in her bedroom, as she alleged, but very close proximity to where Talib was actually shot. And once the detective seized her phones and did the mapping, they found that she had been in constant contact with the person who she had hired to kill her husband, and she was not able to explain that. So that's where cell phone linkage analysis comes in. Now I want to stop for a moment. Let's consider the Lowcard principle and the Lochner principle. Now, I think in FOR 1501 and to some extent in FOR 1502, we learnt about the Lowcard principle. It's one of the main principles we use in crime investigation. In the physical world, we as humans, when we walk around, we leave traces of ourselves. We shed skin, hair, saliva when we touch things. And Edmund Lowcard teaches us that when two objects come into contact with one another, so if I come into a room and I open the door with my hand, I'm touching the door, so I'm leaving part of myself on the door, and if there was any residue on the door, it gets transferred to my hand. So when we come in contact with each other, we leave traces of ourselves on each other. Now, this is also true at a crime scene, much like leaving a fingerprint or a DNA sample, or when I got angry and I shouted at the victim, some of my spit may have landed on a table. Now, we cannot see all the evidence at a crime scene with a naked eye, and that's why we need things like luminol or blue light technology to pick up where there are bodily fluids at crime scenes, or they use these days different colored lights to pick up fingerprints. So that's why the crime scene is of such vital importance to get evidence there. And similar to when two cars collide, they leave paint residue one on the other. So if there's let's say there's a hit and run, a guy runs over a cyclist on a bicycle and drives away, there will be parts of that person's vehicle on the bicycle. Paint of the bicycle will be on the car, and a lot of times some of the glass of the car is left at the scene, and immediately Lowcard is activated. But what about if people move around and they don't physically touch anything? So in other words, I arrive at the scene of a CIT heist, a cash in transit heist. I don't touch anything. I don't speak to anybody, but I have a cell phone in my pocket. What if I can trace your movements using your phone or a fitness tracking device that you have on your wrist, or the GPS of your car? This is called the Lochner principle, and it was patented by Dr. Henny Lochner, who is a 30-year police veteran and who is also a recognized expert in court for cell phone evidence. Now, he argues that in cyberspace, when we walk around, there where signals travel and airwaves travel, we leave evidence that we were there. How do we do that? By my cell phone I have in my hand, by my fitness device I have on my arm, by making a phone call from this place to that place, by driving with my car from place A to place B. There I am touching certain masts that carry these signals, and I leave evidence that I was there. So if I want to prove that person A was at a specific place, I must try and analyze to what extent that person has electronic devices and subpoena the data, and that will give me an indication of the movements of the person. I have, my family and I have an app on our phone. It's called, let me just get you the name now. It's called Life 360. So on Life 360, I can physically track my child when she's walking at school, and I can see the speed at which she's walking between her classes, for example. Similarly, using the cell phone evidence from your phone, I can, or the experts can determine you drove between Pretoria and Johannesburg, where it should have taken you on a Sunday evening at 8 o'clock with the amount of traffic normally, strategic intelligence, looking back, it should have taken you 25 minutes. This time it took you an hour and a half. The signal shows that you traveled 3 kilometers on the highway, then you were stationary for a half an hour, and then you veered off the highway. You were there for 20 minutes, you came back onto the highway, and then you departed for Joburg. So if there was a hit and run on the highway, I could possibly place you at that specific place at that specific time. So this is the value of electronic type evidence. But remember, for this type of evidence, you need a subpoena. You need to subpoena the records from the service providers, and usually only the police can do that. And usually when one needs this evidence, we need it like yesterday. And it does take some time for these processes to play out, and that's where partnerships come in. But whatever you do, obtain the information you're going to use or the evidence you're going to use legally, otherwise it's useless. Now, when we deal with data, and when we deal with the collation and the working with data, there are certain principles, international principles, that are applicable. And these principles for data in our context is the data must be relevant to what we are doing. It must be reliable, and you will see, let me just get to that page. On page 19, there is a reliability rating system in terms of which you can categorize the reliability of the data from absolutely reliable, it's category A, to cannot be evaluated, it's F. So then you take that like with not a pinch of salt, but a bag of salt. Then the data must be valid. And again, there is a weighting of 1 to 6 for how valid this information or this data is. From number 1, it's confirmed by independent and reliable source, to number 6, it cannot be evaluated at all. It's a piece of paper we found lying on the ground. We can't ask anybody about it. We cannot weigh its validity. It's just there. And then it's important that whatever you are dealing with, the data that you gather, remember the Poppy Act, that any group membership you gather must only be relevant to the criminal activities of these people involved. Only those reasonably suspected of involvement. You cannot now gather data on their parents and their grandchildren. That would be total violation. Only on those that you are reasonably suspected of involvement. The information or the data has to be collected legally. And then it has to be classified according to its sensitivity. Is it confidential? Is it secret? Is it top secret? Now, usually when you're in crime intelligence and you're an analyst, you would have to be vetted for security clearance, and your security clearance that you would have would determine what level of data you can work with. And those are the important aspects to look at. It's not negotiable at all. You must look at these things. Can you see the purple post-it note? What does that mean? What must we look at? Yes, before moving on to the next step, we have to look at whether what we've done is valid, accurate, reliable. If there's any shortcoming whatsoever, any gap, we have to address it here. Fix it now before we realize at the end, oh, we should have done this, and then it's too late. Big wastage of money and resources. Okay, step 3 is that of analysis. Now this is where the good stuff comes in. There's a variety of analytical techniques that are used, but the majority require specific training. As an analyst, one needs to have specific skills. Some of these skills are logic thought processes, research writing skills, computer literacy, visualization skills, but sometimes the more right-brained and creative you are, the better it is for an analyst. It depends on what type of data you are analyzing. You also need specific characteristics, and if you want to be an analyst, ask yourself how persistent you are. Can you work independently? Can you make hard decisions? Can you speak truth to power? These are some of the things that you as an analyst are going to have to do. But what else do you as an analyst do? You must look at, when you're analyzing the data, does the data exhibit significant relationships? What do significant relationships mean? Remember, we had a plan. We were looking at syndicates. We were looking at their geographic locations. We were looking at associations. Am I seeing relationships that are significant coming out of the data? Is there a lack of relationships in what I'm looking at? And what could this mean? What is the larger meaning of these findings that I am looking at? And what do I have to go and look at further to help me analyze what I'm looking at to gain a better perspective? And now when the analyst analyzes, there are three main types of analyses that are done. Your first one is a crime analysis, more specifically when you look at crime patterns, because we want to prevent something from happening, we want to detect. This usually guides intelligence-led deployments, and usually the people asking for a crime type analysis are people that, like at the police station, who want to do operational deployment at a local hotspot, for example. They want to target illegal selling of tick or mandrax or whatever the case might be. So the client there is usually operational commanders. The second type of crime analysis is investigative crime analysis. This focuses on detecting the crime by means of the identification and the arrest of the offenders. And usually the person that needs this type of investigation is the investigator or the detective. And then strategic crime intelligence, which focuses on the groupings, the big groupings, their activities. We look at what threat do they pose now and in future. And the recommendations are usually to lessen the threat. We change policy, and the clients are usually at a high level or management based. Now, what do some of these analyses look like? I've given you an example here. There's many more in the book. Activity flow analysis shows you the modus operandi. How does the syndicate work? Association analysis, who connects with who is in the hierarchy? Bank record analysis, what are the banking transactions coming in, going out to different accounts? And there are a variety of them there. But when we are doing these analysis, it's important that we remember that there are rules to follow in any organization. There are principles or standards that we have to adhere to. We cannot just forge ahead, gather information, process it, analyze it, and do with it what we want to. No, there are parameters. These standards are either ISO standards, international best practices like UN conventions or frameworks, or institutional best practices like the ACFE and that type of stuff have. So let's take a moment and consider what are the principles, sorry, for the product of analyzed data. Sorry, I need to cough quickly and I want to mute myself. Okay, beg your pardon, that is better now. Okay, so what are the rules? Now, firstly, it's important that whatever we are working on, there's a police operation or investigation. I'm not doing it as like a crook, like a criminal. No? So I'm not doing it illegally. There are rules and laws and a specific operation for which this has been sanctioned. I've got permission for this. Every step I'm taking forms an integral part of this investigation. Out of this investigation or this analysis, there must be some form of a report. The report must contain conclusions, recommendations, and somebody must have applied thought to the data. The data, the interpretation must, as far as possible, be accurate. And what we used to produce the data must be not analyses 20 years ago, but the most current methods, the most current systems. And we should be able to look at the different points of the data and be able to reflect in terms of quantitative and qualitative. In other words, if there are figures, what are these figures telling us? If there are words or terminology, what are the words or the terminology telling us? Sorry, I missed a step. You notice the pink paper post-it note there. What do we do before we go on to the next step? We determine, we evaluate in terms of validity, accuracy and reliability, and we address any shortcomings before we go to the next step. Okay, the second last step. It's one step, but it's actually two, and this is dissemination. Dissemination basically means we are giving back to those who asked for what we had. It must be done in a timely manner, so it doesn't help they sent us the request today. They want the information tomorrow. That's not going to work. There must be a reasonable time frame, but it also doesn't help we sit on the information and give it to them after the unrest has hit. So the intelligence product must answer the questions we originally asked and address the identified gaps. And we can do this in various ways. There are three rules that, or three criteria that determines how do you share your information. Now, the first principle is the right to know. Who is the legal recipient of the information, and to who may you give this information? Who has access to this information? So that's the right to know, the legal recipient. Who needs to know this? So this applies to the staff within the environment, the office, or even the outside agencies who requested this. And you need to know, it refers to the specific and relevant reason why person A not only has the right to know, but has the need to know and therefore can get the information. The last one, do you have the authority to release? No form of classified crime intelligence, in other words, confidential, secret, top secret, may be released without prior authorization to this group, to this section, to this unit, to the client. So that is very, very important to bear in mind, the dissemination. But now that information is shared with the client. Now what happens now? Something must happen with the information. I get the report. What do I do with the report? I must operationalize it. This means that it refers to the manner which one will use the crime intelligence to address the problem or the threat or the transgression. The situation or the circumstance will determine the approach to be followed to address that problem or threat. Remember, your report will have conclusions and recommendations. The approach may be proactive, it may be reactive. You might go over into operational, specific operations. But what's important, after any crime intelligence is operationalized, best practice dictates that whether it's used successfully in addressing the problem or not, you must get feedback from the client in terms of, you asked for A, I gave you A, you used A, how valid or valuable was A? And this takes us to feedback and evaluation. Feedback is when the client tells you when the information was accurate or not really reliable. It was valid, but it wasn't very timely. I would have liked it a week earlier. And the overall usefulness of the crime intelligence product or service that you did provide. That's feedback. Evaluation is the systemic assessment of this information, which we want to use to determine, is it relevant, credible, accurate, and does it have meaning? This will tell us if what we are doing, must what we are doing continue? Is it a good program? Is it a good process? Must it be modified? Must it be expanded? Must it be made smaller? Must it be reduced? Or must it be stopped? In other words, are we getting value for our money? Are we getting bang for our buck? In measuring effectiveness, a comprehensive evaluation should include the operation and the value of the output to the client. Performance is measured in terms of outputs and outcomes. An output is the service or the product that I produce, which wants to have an impact on the outcome. So it's that something I give you that report. The outcome is the impact that results from the output. So outcomes are usually often outside the direct control of you as the intelligence operator. How do I illustrate that better? It's simply put that the intelligence product itself, so this report I'm giving you with all the graphs and figures, that's the output. You take this output and you plan an operation, you put it into operationalization, and you, after a week, evaluate whether the outcome has changed. In other words, has crime dropped? Has it had the impact you wanted it to have? So that is the difference between output, that is the product I deliver you. You take that product, you put it into your marketplace or into your system, and you evaluate the outcome. I, as an intelligence operator, have no influence on the outcome. The person who operationalizes it has an impact. But now, what if the client asked for a chocolate cake and I produce a donut? Then I'm responsible for that outcome because my output wasn't what he expected. In practice, after the intelligence has been operationalized, the investigator or the analyst should assess and evaluate the effectiveness of this intelligence that was provided. How successful was it? Did it help address the crime problem? Was the intelligence-driven operation successful? Were there shortcomings? How do we fix that? If necessary, the whole process should be activated again. You remember those purple little post-its? That's to prevent this happening so that we can measure at every step of the way, are we on track? There are three elements that we use to measure the performance of a product. We look at it in terms of quality, in terms of efficiency, and in terms of responsiveness. So quality, this measures both the processes we used and the output obtained. So in other words, did we use a quality system? Did we use quality analysis? Did we use quality assessors, analysts? Remember the stale bread? What you don't only focus on the service, but was the communication effective? Were needs communicated soon enough? Were people performing optimally? How are we doing what we are doing? So are we doing the right things? All these things have an impact on quality. When measuring efficiency, we compare outputs with inputs. In other words, we look at what we put in and what did we get out. I put in 10 million rand. I expect a chocolate cake. I get a donut. Is that cost effective? Is that efficient use of the money? And I think in terms of the state capture, we're seeing a lot of inefficiency coming through where departments were given lots of money, but the output or the outcome is not what it should be. And the last one is responsiveness. This is measured in terms of how timely was this information given or the intelligence given to the client. Was he able to use it in time? If we've missed the mark, we have to go back to step one. Can you imagine in terms of time and cost what this would do? And that's why it's so important to pause before we carry on from one step to the next. Where are we? What have we got? Is it valid? Is it accurate? Is it reliable? And then, are we on track? Are we looking at the right things? Do we need to shift our focus? Because your focus might shift. You might get in the analysis phase and realize, yes, somebody, we call it an outlier. Yes, somebody we didn't know of. And immediately we have to shift our focus a little bit more and focus on this person. That's what's important, to keeping your eye on the ball the whole time. Okay, and you guys must be so tired by now, because I know I'm rather tired. Is there, Sahana of Kafilwe, any questions on study unit 2? I know it was a mouthful, and I know you are probably knackered because we've been busy for almost an hour. Any questions?
Hi. No, I'm good, thank you.
Are you good? Okay.
Yeah.
Kafilwe, any questions?
I'm fine, Prof. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'm going to end our class. I am super thrilled that there were 2 of you. I see we lost two of our students along the way. If you speak to anybody, tell them that I will be putting the link of the recording on the module site, and they can go and look at it. I want to really urge you to please access those links, because the links are there to enhance your understanding of the things that I am explaining. Once again, I am terribly sorry for the computer failure I had, but I'm glad we could get through the work. Then have an awesome weekend, and we will see each other next week, Friday, from 1 to 3 for study units 3 and 4. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Prof. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.